Welcome back to Careers Explained. Today we're talking with Kirsten Allen about her career path and current role. She received her bachelor's degree from Davidson College in psychology and her master's in sport and performance psychology and doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Denver. Her previous work experience includes working as a research assistant for the U.S. Olympic Committee and as a sport and performance psychology consultant for the Center for Performance Excellence. She is currently a sport and rehabilitation psychologist at the Shepherd Center. Thanks, Kirsten, for coming on. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. That was such a good summary of what I've done.
Yeah. And there's lots more in there that I didn't.
So there's a lot of other stuff too, but no,
people can explore too. You've done so much. I just picked a few things.
Great. Appreciate it.
We'll work back to that path of those points I mentioned and maybe some others, but starting with your current role right now, can you describe what you do as a sport and rehabilitation psychologist?
Yeah, so my job is currently at Shepherd Center, which is a rehabilitation hospital for brain injury, spinal cord injury, multiple sclerosis, if I could talk. And specifically, I work in two of our outpatient/day program clinics. One is the Share Military Initiative, which is specifically working with active duty or retired military, first responders, police officers, that kind of thing, who have suffered a mild traumatic brain injury of some kind, also known as concussion, and working with them on the recovery process. How do they cope emotionally? Very interdisciplinary, have physical therapists, speech therapists, MDs, nursing, a whole across the board gamut of interdisciplinary care. So that's super cool. And then my other job is in the same building, the complex concussion clinic, and that's outpatient, where I work with people who are civilians, athletes specifically is mostly what I work with. Is I get the athletes who have had recent head injuries where that was either on the football field or the volleyball court or anything like that. And I am the psychologist that works with them on, hey, do I want to go back to the sport, or is this, what can I do with this? I've had anxiety before. How can I improve my performance? The injury made this worse, so on and so forth. So those are my two jobs in the same building. So one job right now.
So within those two roles, you talked a little bit about kind of what you do with more of the athlete side of it.
Yep.
Can you give some detail on general roles and responsibilities, whether they're similar or different for those jobs, like what it looks like on a day-to-day basis? Day-to-day
basis. So the Share Military Initiative is what's called a day program, in the sense that the patients are there from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Monday through Friday, and they live residentially, but it's like they're very high functioning people, so they're independent. So I meet with people in that group 1 to 2 times per week, and I also run some group therapy. And then we have team meetings where we consult with the team. I do things called like co-treats, where physical therapy and I will work with them on headache management, sleep management plans, and we'll collaborate on that kind of stuff. The CCC job, it's outpatient. So I see that person maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks or so. And then I'll still do co-treats too, where again, PT or occupational therapy and I will work together to help the patient meet their goals. But it's way less involved because it's just outpatient. So not as much teamwork is required.
Gotcha. So it sounds like a lot of either you're working with patients most of the time. Is that correct? It's in group settings or one-on-one or meeting with other people helping to get them to their goals. So what percentage of your day would you say is alone or working with patients?
So we have, I work in hour slots from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. So from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. I have 1 hour sessions with people. So it may be, I have 3 back-to-back, 1-1-1, depending on just client schedules and what my census is at the time. Then we have a lunch break at 11. The clients also have a lunch break if they're day program. And then I have 12 to 3, I have more clinical 1 hour sessions. We also have of course, like all the admin stuff, I'm not even talking about that. We have documentation, medical records, charging, staff meetings, team meetings, huddles, other projects I'm working on, presentations we do, educational courses we run, other supervision roles within the hospital. So there's a lot of other stuff. So I usually am there from 7:45-ish, if I'm honest, sometimes 8, and then leave about 4:30 or 5 every day. So
So once you finish those one-on-one hour visits with patients at 3, you have to do all those other jobs you mentioned, the admin, the presentations,
the docking, all that stuff. Yeah.
And with the patients, can you give, it may vary, but maybe the average sort of, how long are you working with them? What are some typical things that come up in those one-on-one sessions?
Yeah, and this is kind of, so I'll start with the military program. Because the program's a day program, that means it's structured in the sense they have a start time and an end time, as far as treatment duration. So we have programs, some clients are there. I have a client right now who's 3 weeks, and we have another client who's 16 weeks. So it's tailored to the individual, what their needs are, and how long the team thinks we will need to meet with them. My outpatient clinic is a little bit more flexible. Sometimes I meet with people twice, and it's like they just needed kind of validation that what they're going through is normal, and I just needed to give them some education, and they're like, yep, I'm better, good, thank you, my stress is resolved, sweet. And then some, it's like I don't really have a set discharge date, because as long as their insurance approves, I can work with them until we kind of have like a fluid timeline, and we're working on, so common topics across centers include stress management, sleep management, headache management, pain management, anxiety management, mood variation, depression, frustration, quality of life, as far as like, where am I going from here? What are my career interests? What are my values? How aligned are my current values with my current lifestyle? Am I satisfied? Relationship dynamics. I can keep going, but so
This
a lot of
awesome.
things. Yeah, so pretty fun stuff. Yeah.
Okay, very helpful overview to get a sense of the day to day. And then what are the things that you like and find challenging about the role?
Yeah, so I love the part, so because my master's, I started going into this because my master's is sports psychology, my doctorate is clinical. So it's kind of on a spectrum of the intensity of clinical issues I work with. And on the lighter side, if you want to call it lighter, would be the performance enhancement part, or like the positive psychology, strengths-based. Love it. That's like my forte, like my happy place. I can do that part in my sleep. And then the more challenging side is the more where you get to the like psychosis. I don't work with a lot with psychosis, but at the same time, we can get some bipolar features or personality features, or really extensive complex trauma, and or some super heavy medical complexities. So the more complicated the case, the naturally it just requires a lot more brain power, space, time, energy, collaboration. So I would say that's the part where sometimes I can figure it out really quickly, really easily. Sometimes it takes just a lot more concerted effort to figure it all out. So.
And can you give an example on maybe one of the more complex interpretations of what it looks like when you're working with doctors and the other people who are helping with care? How do you collaborate?
Yeah, so every week we have a team meeting. So we meet for an hour every week, and we have like our case manager runs the show, but it's MD, all the team members, nursing, and we will just kind of collaborate on medications. For example, I have a guy who just a lot of emotional volatility, ups and downs, has some urges and cravings, and we'll work on mood stabilizer medications, and we'll kind of collaborate on that. And then nursing will be the one that helps provide medication education, kind of tracks progress and symptoms for efficacy. MD and I will collaborate on like features that I see, that what he thinks are the best medications for it, and then just kind of collaborate from there. But we also have this thing called really what it is, it's like a rounding log where we can document different notes of like, hey, I had this thought with this client, MD, bring it to your attention. So it's different in an email where it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. It's more of like a page where we go and type questions and chats. And so that's one example of how we do it.
That's great. And then on the more individual front, when you said sometimes it's easier and you figure out what to do, for you personally, what's the process of when they come in? How do you assess what you are going to do as a practitioner with them?
Yeah, so it always starts with like a semi-structured clinical interview. My first session with them, it's like I usually I have a consult question. There's a reason they were referred to me, because most of the time it's referrals. Right. Like MD will refer this client for this reason, or they're part of the program for this reason. So I have a snapshot of why they're there. Okay. And again, my clinical practice is mostly working with the brain injury. Like I'm working on that. That's the central target. but there's a lot of other features that go with it. So again, the first session is a semi-structured clinical interview, gather injury history, gather psychiatric history, psychosocial history, medications that they are on now, medications they've done before that were not effective, therapists they might be working with now. I work on like, what are their major stressors right now? What are coping tools they have in their toolbox? What are their main treatment goals? Also do like a safety risk assessment, just suicidal ideation, any substance use, look for their support system, check on their education, their insight levels. Do they have a lot of knowledge of what they're going through, or is this all brand new to them? And then we use this tool called client-centered goals, where we set goal attainment, use goal attainment scaling to set these specific targets that we want people to work on. Because psychology, you can work with people on everything, and you can get lost in like the complexity of things that you can dive into. So we really collaborate with the clients using motivational interviewing to set clear goals that that reflect their interests and what they want to move towards. Like, I want to increase my independence, or I want to be able to run 5 miles without feeling significant headaches or pain or something like that. And that's kind of what guides the practice. So, yeah.
And then before we go into your training, can you talk about from here, what are the opportunities for kind of moving up?
Yeah. So moving up for me, what's more moving out. I want to move out in the sense of I work with concussions a lot, but I also am working towards moving into the more performance enhancement realm. So I can work with anybody who doesn't have an injury or has an injury that's not a concussion. So starting private practice is a goal in the future, to just broaden my access, or basically broaden people's access to me and my specialty services. And because there's a lot of interest in the field, and a lot of times I tell clients I don't have a private practice, I can't take anybody. So luckily my current job, there's a non-compete clause that doesn't bind me to or limit me to that. So I have freedom to build an outside network there too. So that's definitely something I'm looking towards.
Okay, so we'll pause there and then loop back on the details of how you are thinking about going about that, to understand how you have the qualifications to even do that. Talk about the training and how you got into this role. What were the requirements, and along the way, why you chose them?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting journey. At Davidson, I was a psych major, like you said, and at Davidson, it's a bachelor's of science versus bachelor of arts, and so it's a lot more not research heavy necessarily, but just more cognition heavy. So I would say while I was there, I didn't really have a clear idea of what I wanted to do in the field. I also graduated in 2008 when the economy crashed. So there was a shortage of jobs unless you wanted to go straight into grad school. And again, I didn't know yet. So I had this, luckily, long story short, I ended up as a swim coach because I was a swimmer through college at Davidson, and got a full-time coaching job with health insurance, which is shocking. I know, it's like, you got to have health insurance. And so that introduced me, ironically, I worked with, there was an elite athlete realm within that club team, and there was a sports psychologist they used as a consult role. And he's actually a Davidson alum, and he's retired now, but he is what Charlie Brown was his name. You'll never forget that because his name is Dr. Charlie Brown.
I thought that was a joke. Nope, real Charlie Brown.
Dr. Charlie Brown. And so he introduced me to University of Denver and other graduate schools, but University of Denver is the one that has a master's in sport and performance psychology. So if you want to be a sport consultant, and you don't want to go to the doctorate level, that's a route you can take where you can get masters in counseling, masters in clinical, masters in social work. But I knew I already wanted to do sport. So it's a subspecialty within the field of sport and performance psychology. So I have like a master's in counseling with a specialization in sport and performance enhancement. If I had stopped there, that's like I'm limited in what all I can offer. Ironically, I was consulting with a swim team out in Denver, Colorado, and there was a swimmer who had a concussion, quote unquote. I say that in the sense he got hit in the head by a Frisbee during ultimate. And I was like, that's not really a concussion, but like I knew the swimmer, and I knew deep down that was basically his rationale to find a way to get out of swim practice because he just didn't love the sport anymore. So, and I was the consultant, so he would come to me, but I just couldn't go very far with him. It was kind of outside of my scope. I'm like, I can't really, I don't know what to do, honestly. And so that's what led me to go back and get my doctorate. I always kind of knew I was going to go get my doctorate in clinical. And I had to decide between PhD versus PsyD. A PhD is a doctorate in philosophy, and a PsyD is a doctorate in psychology, clinical psychology in this case. And the PhD, it can be applied, but you also have to focus more on research, and you have to find somebody, an advisor, that you have their research interests align with what you are. So you're kind of signing up to work with one specific person in a PhD route. Not that it's always like that, but that's predominantly the case. Whereas a PsyD, it's very applied. You go into it and you're like, you get thrown in the deep end your first year where you're doing applied work hands-on. And I just knew that that's my style of learning. Had that in my master's experience. So knew I want to do that in my doctoral experience. And after not working with the concussion part, I just knew I needed more training in neuropsychology and rehab psychology, in addition to the clinical. So that's I went down this path of like the more medical health, rehab, neuro, tried to taper in some sport as I could, but that's a whole other thing right there. And yeah, I went down that road. That's a really long road. I don't even know how to explain it really quickly.
No, that was perfect.
Okay.
And then I am going to go back and break down the steps that you said for more details, starting with the master's. When you talked about the options, which was a great overview.
Yeah.
Why you talked about you had a background in sports. Was that why you were interested in sports as opposed to social work or counseling?
Yes, absolutely. I always knew I love sports. I just loved coaching. But I found when I was working with the swimmers, I was always working more on just like their mental health or mental wellness, like whole person identity formation kind of thing. Yeah, I was doing like the technical skills too, but like that was really my calling. And sports psychology is about really helping people find their whole self. Yes, performance enhancement to help them reach those ultimate goals that they have set, but also just like be a well-rounded athlete, student athlete, person athlete, however you want to describe it. So that was really what called me to that field. I knew that was my realm.
And whole self, as opposed to in clinical or social work, what would be kind of the pair there?
It's not that it's different. It's just more, they don't have the training to work with a person on athletic performance enhancement. So in sports psychology, you also get training in exercise physiology and like technical motor skills, biofeedback, psychophysiology, that kind of stuff. You get a little bit more of the what's special to athletics, where in social work, you'll get more into the cultural dynamics, the systemic stuff, all of that. I can't even speak to it properly because I don't have my master's in that, but something like that, somewhere in that area.
That's very helpful to understand the distinctions. And then once you have your master's, you mentioned the limitation with the Frisbee head injury. Can you describe more in depth what was the difference between the gap of having your master's and what you could do versus what getting the PsyD allowed you to do?
So with the doctorate, I can pretty much treat anything. There's a spectrum. The sports psychology website, the Applied Association for Sports Psychology, actually is a really good website or like a handout where they describe the spectrum. So with a doctorate and a master's, I literally can work on any type of issue. I have the breadth of training to trust anything. So there's zero limitations for what I can and cannot do. It's just more my choice of what I want to do with it. So yeah, that's kind of, with a master's, if it's something that's more, say a client does have mental health issues, maybe they do have some pretty intense depression, but you still really want to work with them, you just can't. It's outside your scope of practice. That's where it's frustrating. It's like, I just don't have the mental health license. I don't have the liability practice skills. I don't have the knowledge, skills, and ability to like efficaciously meet this client's needs. So that requires you to refer out, but then you're like, you have to build your referral resources and then insurance, it's just a lot of hoops to jump through. So it's just easier it's not easier. It takes quite a bit of effort, but it is, you broaden your options much more with getting that doctoral level training and your paycheck. Talk about that.
Is a very important. And on last question on the master's is what is within the scope of that? If you have to refer out for the mental health,
Right. Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's really, it's an ethical thing. There are guidelines, so to speak, but most ethical guidelines are just recommendations. They're not strict rules. So it's really up to the person to deem what's in their scope of practice, because there are a lot of masters in clinical and counseling psychology who and social work who can treat the more severe persistent mental illnesses or depression or anxiety. They have that specialty training for it, but sport and performance psychology, again, you get that other training, the more physical, tactical performance enhancement side that just maybe people could get additional training to help them meet those needs, but that's just not their calling. That's not what they were trained for. So most people with their masters open up a private practice of a sport consulting place where, again, they just do more workshops, more work with the younger athletes on performance enhancement. There's also a bunch of people who go into tactical training where they work on military bases and they become performance consultants. And I have a lot of my active duty guys that have worked with these people too, where they work with them on like the sleep management, the how to manage their anxiety when they're in a combat situation, to all that kind of stuff. So people can do that. They can go that direction with the masters,
That is fascinating to hear about. Thank you for explaining it.
Yeah.
And then you get to the next step of PsyD versus PhD. Can you talk about the decision-making process there of why you chose PsyD?
Yeah. Some of what I alluded to is like, I'm a very applied learner, and every doctoral program you go into has like a what is it called? I don't even know what it's called, honestly, but the PsyD that I went to, the program was a practitioner scholar. So it's kind of what is that called? Basically the way they train you, their training paradigm, I guess you can call it. So there's a scholar, academic, scientific scholar or academic scholar, blah, blah, blah. For me, again, practitioner scholar was the model of the program I chose. So it's looking at grad schools, they will advertise their training model that they use in their website. PhDs tend to be more research in, which is more scientific, maybe some scholar, but not a lot of applied practitioner work. And again, I'm not the biggest research person, don't love it. It's cool from afar. I appreciate it, but I don't want to do it. I still do it, but don't even get me started on the torture that is. So people just, if you're going a PhD route, there are a certain number of professors there that have their research realms, and you need to look at their research and see if you're interested in continuing or joining them on that journey. And if you are, cool, go for it. But most people in a PhD program don't start applied work until like their second or third year. And it just takes, so doctorates have a model. To become a licensed psychologist, you have to have a 3+1, which means 3 years of academic work and then 1 year of internship. And when you have a PhD route, you usually don't get to jump through all the hoops in the 3-year timeline. You usually take about 4 or 5 years at least before you are ready to apply for the 1-year internship. PsyD, you can. I came in with my master's, so I actually got some credits transferred. So I was able to do a 3+1, 3 years of PsyD and then my internship. But a lot of my friends did a 4-year or 5-year track. It's your choice, but applied, again, you have to do a dissertation, a doctoral paper, but it doesn't have to be a super heavy research. You have much more flexibility. And again, with the PsyD, your first year, you're in a field placement and you do that for a whole year. You have individual clients you do in a private practice. So you're literally practicing what you're learning in class with the clients. And so that's my learning style, is much more trial and error kind of thing. So if you like research, go more the PhD route. If you want more applied, go more the PsyD route. So
super helpful distinction there. And then a follow-up on that, as you mentioned, having your own private practice.
mm-hmm.
I've heard a master's cannot open their own practice.
They can.
Okay.
Yeah, they can. Yeah.
Can you go over which degrees can do what in terms of private practice?
From a private practice perspective, there's not a lot of limitations. It's more, you just have to get, let's see, if you look at the website Psychology Today, for example, has a whole listing of current practitioners. And if you look through it, there are LPCs. And if you're a licensed practitioner scholar or licensed practitioner counselor, I forgot what the C stands for, you have the certification demonstrated to show that you have the qualifications needed to provide the services that you do, So a lot of people do have private practice that are LCSW or MSW or Masters in Counseling. I don't even know what those acronyms that is, I guess an MA, but they also are an LPC. So you can do a private practice. It's just you don't charge as much because you're a master's level versus a doctorate level who does private practice. They can charge a lot more because they have a lot more education.
That's super helpful. I had a big misunderstanding there.
Okay.
And then on the charging, because obviously money matters to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Is it when you say they charge less, just supply and demand, or are there specific criteria of as a PhD versus master's, you expect to make an average of this much more?
Yeah, I mean, because with a master's, again, think about student debt. You don't have as much student debt. It's 2 years versus at least 3+1. So the average rate for, I mean, it depends on the geographic region you're in. The other thing is with masters, a lot of master's level providers, they use insurance. They accept insurance. It's more important for them to broaden their client population to target those that would use insurance to pay for mental health, which, as you know, is a whole other health insurance is a beast in and of itself. But doctorate levels, because of their training and their breadth of what they can work with, like master's level, they have a narrower pool of who they're qualified to work with. Doctorate level, again, you can work with anything. You don't have to accept insurance, and you can charge more just because of your expertise. You know, it's kind of like going to see a nurse practitioner versus an MD kind of thing. That's the parallel there, you know.
And so on the timing of you got your master's, then PsyD, is 6 years the standard, and a master's can cover part of that, you said, with the credits?
So yes, you can do what's called a terminal master's, which is where you get a master's that ends in a master's. And then there are, when you apply for a doctoral program, you can, and you get accepted, you have to get accepted first, of course, for them to even consider this. You can transfer up to 40 credits. And that's, you have to have a certain number of credits. Don't even ask me how many there are, 90 or something like, I don't even know. And that's the dean of academics of your grad school has to approve that the courses are similar. It was easy for me because my master's and my doctorate were in the same program. So I was like, walk in the park. But I had friends who had a terminal master's from another program, came to the same grad school, and they got like 30 or something. So not all were transferable, but you can waive, like ethics, for example. I didn't have to retake ethics. I didn't have to retake career counseling. I didn't have to retake consultation. I didn't have to take certain classes like that, easily transferred classes. And so you can do a terminal master's that increases your likelihood of getting into a doctorate because you're already demonstrating your interest, your expertise, your skill set. But you can also go straight into a doctorate. You don't have to do a master's first from undergrad, and it's a much more competitive. You have to demonstrate a lot of stuff in your undergrad approach or your career. If you go after undergrad, you do a job. A lot of people were teachers or counselors of some kind, volunteering or something like that. And then they apply for a doctorate. And then within your doctorate, you get a master's. So after your second year, you have to demonstrate, you have to pass a competency exam after your second year of grad school, where it's like a whole process. But if you pass that, then you earn another master's, but that's ingrained into the doctoral program. That just means you cleared and passed and are ready to go into your third year. So you can take time. I took time off between my master's and my doctorate. Personally, that was just what I needed. Some people go straight through. So it's up to you.
So pass that test, master's partway through if you're on the track for PsyD. And then is there another test once you finish to get the licensure?
Oh gosh, yeah. So when you apply for internship, there's this whole internship thing where it's a national matching program. So you apply your third or fourth year in the early winter, late fall, early winter. Or is it early? Anyway, somewhere around there. And then you get selected for different programs across the country for interviews. And you have to go through this whole interview process. And I won't even get started. And then there's a match day where you get matched with, you had to submit your choices for places that you got granted interviews, and then it's a ranking system. And then you get matched based on how high the program ranked to you and how you ranked within that program. You find out a day, you get an email that's like, oh, you matched here. And then that's in like February. And then you start your 1 year internship, July or August. And then you do that for a whole year. And then you graduate. You have to pass all the competency stuff for your internship. It's a paid position, very cheap, but it's a paid position. And then you apply for postdoctoral fellowship. And then you have to go through a whole match process again, if that's the track you choose. And then you have to take a licensure exam, which is what makes you a clinical psychologist. And it's called the EPPP. And it's a whole incredibly tough exam. I'm not going to lie, it was not fun at all. There's 2 parts, and if you don't pass it, you are not a licensed psychologist. So you can't label yourself that way. You can still technically practice, but you're not sticking with ethics as well as you should. And then there's a board certification process. I could keep going. There's a lot that goes into all this stuff. So
very helpful to understand all the loops. So along with the timeline, the effort, there's also all of these tests along the way and
demonstrate competency. Yep.
Okay. And so then once you got your PsyD, and actually one more question on that is PhD, I've heard you get a stipend if that's true. Is that also true with the PsyD?
It depends. Yeah. So that's the other part about student debt. So PsyD is much less scholarship oriented or grant funded, because these are most of the psychologists, or excuse me, the professors who are PsyDs are also working psychologists. They have a private practice on their own, so they aren't doing research, they're doing applied work. And whereas PhD, they're doing research and it's grant funded, so they have grants to pay for students and give them stipends and stuff like that. So again, the difference of the path that you want to choose, I have a lot of friends who did PhD who have 0 student debt. I chose PsyD. I have quite a bit of student debt. Then I also have done public service loan forgiveness, so I can waive a lot of that off. So it's not like so bad that you are walking yourself into debt forever. It's just more a choice that you make. But you can also get teaching assistant positions or graduate research assistant positions where you can get some money. So I had that where you can make a little cash, some money along the way if you have time, which is a whole other thing, but there's an option there. And there are scholarships.
No. So yes, so a few options to get money, but expect a key difference is the PhD, you would get a stipend, you would not have debt. And then
not always, but more commonly. Yeah.
More commonly. Okay. Yeah. And so then once you got your degree and you passed the licensure exam, from your roles from that point to now, what have you learned certain qualities of a job you do and don't want along the way?
Yeah. So for me, I already knew after my internship was at this place called a VA, which is Veterans Affairs. It's a hospital. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through, a lot of like bureaucracy, not all bad, but just I learned pretty quickly. I don't like to be, I perceive it as restrictions, and that's not fair to people who flourish in that environment. But for me, that was my perception of it. And so it was very important for me not to work in a big corporate hospital, government run place. That was important for me. So having but I love teamwork. I love interdisciplinary care. Working in the healthcare system, that's kind of like the gold standard of care, is working with different therapists who all have different training backgrounds. So you can be targeting the same issue, but you all see it from a different perspective. And that collaboration and teamwork is huge for me. I love that. I flourish under that. So that was important for me to be able to keep that type of care going. I like medical. I like working in the healthcare industry. That is definitely good for salary increase. You get paid a lot more money in the healthcare industry than if you do like a counseling clinic or university clinic. There's a lot more requirements for sure, but again, you reap the benefits of it. What else I don't like? I know what type of population I enjoy working with the most. You can't always pick and choose who you work with. So that takes a little bit of just reminding yourself why you got in the field in the first place. But that's the price you pay for some of the other benefits you get. So there's a lot more to it, but I'll kind of stop there.
And so from that point now, considering private practice, sort of what are your steps that you're thinking about there? And when you talk about collaboration, do you see yourself having a practice with others? What do you envision that to look like? And what are the steps to even open?
Definitely. Yeah, I think it'll be small steps. For sure, it's like in any business you work for, there's a non-compete clause that you always sign when you start a job. And it's basically like, you can't take the business with you elsewhere. And and that's appropriate. So for me, because my field and my specialty is so broad, ironically saying a specialty is broad, but it is, I don't have to worry about that. So basically, I think the first step is getting a business running. So private practice, you have to have an LLC, you have to have a domain name, you have to have malpractice insurance, you have to have a business plan, you got to have lots of stuff, a lot of little details that you need to work out. So for me, the goal is to really start small, very, 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 very small. And the biggest question is to make sure it's not for the money, it's for the joy and working for, yeah, it's nice to have a little extra money that you as a booster, but it's mostly just because I want to use the skills I don't always get to use in my current job, and so I'm going to have a very small target population and build a private practice, just a couple clients on top of my work hours, which again, pros and cons, but use that as a stepping stone to eventually sometime long-term. I won't say what the whole vision is because as we know, it could change as we progress with time, but I definitely know I want to keep working with the team in some shape or capacity. And we'll just see how that kind of emerges as time passes. So
that sounds awesome. You get to customize a little bit more who you work with when it's your own practice, as you said. Yep. And so then in order for someone to get there, if they say that sounds amazing, starting from kind of ground zero post-grad, do you have advice on how to narrow interest out of those original options and figure out what might be right for you education-wise?
So part of the whole grad school journey is you have to pick a specialty while you're in it. So you have to, again, I speak more from a PsyD perspective because that's what I did, but they make you do a year-long field placement every year, and you have pools of areas that you can specialize in, whether that's schools or college counseling or health or substance use or forensic or international disaster or sport or child or women's health or cancer. I mean, I could keep going. Lots of stuff.
Love the context you give is so helpful.
Yeah, or military. Like, I mean, again, you can do Latino. You can so many subspecialties, and so there's different tracks that you have to choose while you're in grad school, and that's kind of your warm up. So by the time you go for internship, your internship is within that subspecialty. So that's your opportunity to kind of see what it's like to actually work in that industry. And then from there, you can decide, hey, this is the industry I want to keep going in, or you're kind of like, nope, this isn't it for me. Again, usually most people these days go to postdoctoral residency. And for that, that's depending on the specialty track you use, if it's more in the medical realm, it's a 2-year postdoc at a hospital site, or if you're doing more clinical, then it could be a 1-year. It could be just going into private practice and having a paid supervisor. I won't go into details, but basically to answer your question, there's a lot of warm up for you to choose your sub-track as you go. So by the time you get to the job market, you're not like, I have no idea where to go. You really narrow down your fields.
And any advice for trying to get a feel for maybe like shadowing what those are before the year-long commitment of an internship?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's what the field placements are for, is to get your opportunity to practice it. So it's like so some people like me, for example, I knew what I wanted to do before I came in. So my track was pretty set, but I had a lot of classmates who didn't know. So their first year they did this, their second year they did this, or they added part-time field placements on top of it. So they kind of got to dip their toes in it, but not with such a commitment, and or they observed, shadowed, just to like, there's a lot of networking involved, and grad schools are built to provide you those direct contacts, and you don't have to work so hard to form them. So it's not that hard to do it as long as you're motivated. Obviously, you got to be motivated, but you wouldn't be there if you weren't. But yeah, that's how most people get it worked out.
And so then also, if you have an idea of what you want to do, when you were looking at schools, I know you mentioned that the psychologist you worked with went to University of Denver.
Yeah. Would
you have advice on, out of all those programs and places you can go, how to narrow down where to?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think that's a really tough one. I think my advice to people is to at least try and narrow down what you think you're interested at this point and start with that. Look for schools that offer that subspecialty opportunity. Well, actually, I think even before that, or as they do that at the same time, decide if they want to do PhD or PsyD, if they're interested in research or not. Look at both, choose their subspecialty interests, at least dive into it, see what the program offers, read what the program's teaching styles are, read about their retention rate, their graduation, which is similar to retention, I think. Yeah. Their placement opportunities. I wish I could tell people how to start, but it's so much, like I'm learning there's more online schools. I'm not the biggest fan of online schools because I did not go to school during COVID. So I didn't have to, that was still in person was the only way to learn. So I don't know what it's like, but there are a lot more online schools now. So yeah, I wish that I could be more helpful, but that's about the best I can give you guys for a starting point.
Oh, I think that's super helpful advice. And then on that front, once people have a list of schools that match their interests, as you said, with those factors of teaching style, advice for the programs are so competitive nowadays, advice for how to differentiate to get in.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, so it's ironic, I worked in the admissions office at my grad school too. That was my TA position. So I'm pretty
great person to ask.
Yeah, but I mean, I was a long time ago at this point, so I don't know how out of date it is, but when I was there, a lot of it was like basically demonstration of really truly why you want to go into the field. Most people, there's admission questions, essays that you have to write, and a PsyD is going to ask you a very specific type of question, not just a general question of like, why are you applying to the school? It's more like, what do you hope to accomplish, or what do you hope to achieve, or something? And everyone says, I want to help people. Well, duh. We all went into service industry for that, but why? Like, what's your journey? How come you got there? So really being the key with a psychologist or anybody applying for grad school is to really truly know and the healthcare industry is to know yourself. You really have to be able to practice what you preach. So if you don't demonstrate self-awareness, self-insight, reflection, willingness to grow, willingness to evolve, learn, absorb, collaborate, you're going to have a really uphill battle. So they're looking for that level of insight. Yes, they want you to have applied practice, at least in some volunteer capacity, or research, some type of demonstration that you've actually put your toes in the water to affirm that you have an idea of what you were walking into, versus just like trying to jump in the deep end without a lot of insight. Your GRE scores, I don't even know if they're still accepting GREs. I know COVID, they waived a lot of that. They are, okay. So it depends on the school, yeah. So GREs more in the PhD route might be more important. In the PsyD route, it's more about your skills, not just your test taking abilities. So GREs weren't as important. Letters of reference, huge. Make sure you get people who are truly going to speak to your strengths. Don't get people who are going to write some sort of good letters, because that's a tell right there, and people who are really relevant to the field of the school you're applying to. I think the other thing too is reach out to some of the professors, reach out to the admissions office and ask for students who are currently in the program, learn from them. They have people who are assigned or have expressed interest in playing that role, so use it. Request to go visit in person, or at least attend any meeting opportunities they have. The more they know your name, so when they see your application, they actually know who you are. They're gonna be like, oh, okay, got it. Makes sense, and that's a huge leg up. So yeah, that's a lot of information. Hopefully that helps.
That was awesome information. That was like Christmas.
There you go.
Any other advice on throughout the process, or general career advice that you have for people trying to start out?
I think patience is okay. I work with, in my job right now, I work with a lot of people who are wanting to have it all figured out already, regardless of your age, your stage in career. I have a lot of people I work with who are just getting started, just graduated from college, or are still in college. I also have a lot of people who are retiring from the military and starting this next phase of life. And it's take your time to figure out what's truly meaningful for you. It doesn't have to be perfect. At the same time though, it's better to try it. This is my style of learning, but it's better to try instead of waiting to find the perfect answer. So it's a balance between like not waiting forever, but also not pushing yourself to have it all figured out immediately, so my path, there's no such thing as a perfect path. There are some people who have it easier, who can go. My sister went straight. She knew what she wanted to do and she had a straight line. Mine was like, I'm drawing a visual in my mind of like everywhere, back and forth. It wasn't straight, but it worked out, and I'm very grateful for that. Hindsight's 2020, of course, but I think if I had gone a different way, who knows where I'd end up. So
what if there's no right?
Yeah, there's no right. It's like, be unique to yourself. But I think the other thing too is like people, we're all about self-growth, but we also have to remember that we are part of a greater community, like a greater world in general. So we can't always be so self-involved that we don't attune to the needs of others at the same time. So just wanted to throw that little pitch in there. I'm finding that we're all so self-involved that we gotta step back and look at the big picture of the world as it is too. So that's important.
I love that, and all the advice you've given. I'm super grateful for your time and for diving into all of that. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. I hope it made sense. I'm glad it made sense to you, and you did a great job of tracking my diatribe. So awesome job.